Okay, Mr. Chair, you can begin.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Hello and welcome. I call to order the May 27th, 2020 meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. As a preliminary matter, I, Tom Jacob, Finance Committee Chair, permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, as I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Carol Fischati.
Here.
Barry Kaufman.
Here.
John Conley.
Here.
Josh Levy.
Here.
Rick Lanetta.
Here.
Garrett Parker.
Here.
And Dick Riley.
Here.
And also staff are here, Louise Misgard. We have some anticipated speakers this evening who will be recognized when the committee is addressing the related agenda item, and I will call on them at that time. Good evening. This open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's Executive Order 2020 due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate transmission of COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, the Needham Finance Committee is convening by Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating in video conference by video conference. Accordingly, that others may be able to see you, so take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body will be available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. We are now turning to the first item of the agenda. Before we do, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold your name. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. And finally, each vote taken this evening will be conducted by roll call vote. And with that, we will turn to the first agenda item. The first item is the approval of the minutes. They have not yet been completed, so we will go to the next agenda item, which is Article 32, the Citizens Petition Sewer Line Extension. We are anticipating that petitioner Tal, I hope I don't screw this up too badly, I'm not even try it, is here. Is he on the Zoom call, do you know?
I don't see him there. No, I think he's not here.
Okay. We were uncertain if he was going to show up or not. So we will move to the next item. This item is really an advisory, and we are, as I understand it, so that it is not critical to our needs. So we'll move right to the school operating budget, Article 14, and the operating budget and the school department element of it. Are Dan or Ann available?
Mr. Chair, I'll bring in the superintendent who has joined us, and I'll ask the superintendent if there is others he wants to join in on the conversation.
Thanks, Mr. Davidson. Ann Gulati, I imagine, is there, and I know there are members of the school committee. Not sure that they were planning on speaking, but I believe they're part of the meeting. But Ann Gulati, yes, if that's a possibility, she could.
I brought Ann in.
And I'd like to, and Mr. Chair, when it's appropriate, I'd like to, if I could borrow the screen so I could share a brief presentation.
That'd be fine. I'll let Dave. For you.
And Mr. Chair, I've invited in Connie Barr, Michael Grice, and that's it.
Andrea Longo Carter.
She's no longer on the list. She
No,
might have.
okay.
Here.
She
Just
is now
as
here.
Andrea Carter.
Okay. So Andrea Carter is also here.
Okay, so Dr. Gutenkant, you want to take over and share your screen? Is that correct?
Sure.
He's got that ability, Dave?
I'll go ahead and do that. Just a brief presentation, if I may. What I wanted to do this evening is really provide some context for what's been going on in schools since the period of school closure. It will help with the conversation around the budget, I think. And I figured it'd give you some insight into what's been going on since March 13th when we closed down. First of all, I want you to know that we adopted immediately what I've been referring to a lot as an all hands on deck approach to this health emergency. And that's what it is. And it obviously impacted all of our lives and education as well. What I can share with you is that since March 13th, 5,700 of our students have been learning remotely, and they will do so through the close of school on June 19th. And all of our staff are working to support our students. And what I mean by the all hands on deck approach is really some of the amazing work that our teachers have taken on to meet student needs while they're teaching remotely, as well as our teacher assistants. What I told our staff is that they would have to work in new and different ways and outside of their typical roles to meet this unprecedented challenge. So our tutors, our teacher assistants, who typically are assigned to a child or maybe two children, our kindergarten teacher assistants may be assigned to kindergartners. They've been taking on new roles, tutoring students, working in small groups, doing reading, and contacting families. Our clerical folks are still, running the business operations, purchase orders and newsletters and keeping parents informed, as well as reading to students, conducting virtual recess, contacting families, because we are making concerted effort to understand who's engaged and who's not engaged during this crisis so that we can figure out what we need to do for those students who have been absent. Our van drivers provided some assistance for the town to drop off meals to senior citizens. And all of our nurses are contact tracers working with the Needham Department of Public Health. So it has been an all hands on deck approach with our staff. Additionally, we have deployed 400 devices, laptops, iPads, Chromebooks for students who needed them and did not have them. We now have over 4,100 devices deployed in the Needham Public Schools to students and staff. Our Nutrition Services Department, part of the all hands on deck approach, they have to date provided over 31,000 meals to Needham students. One of the impacts of our learning from home is that many of our special education students have really been adversely impacted by school closure. They need a very different kind of learning opportunity than we can provide them from a screen and even from a packet or from a book. So we're challenged by that and trying to figure out how we can get that right. One thing I'm very proud of is that our Needham teachers have really reinvented themselves during this crisis. And I will tell you that of all of our local communities, 17, Needham teachers provide an average of over 4 hours of live weekly interaction and instruction, small group, office hours, classroom time, advisory, compared to under 2 hours in our local communities. And that's because of the dedication, the commitment of Needham's teachers. So one of the questions that has come up to me often is, when are we reopening? A few things I can tell you is that we did receive $80,000 in federal funds, which we will apply to summer school. We're looking to offer a program for students without charge to identify students who have not been as engaged and to try to work with them and their families to provide likely a remote learning experience. We're still trying to sort through that, but it is an excellent use of the federal funds because, of course, we are concerned with loss of learning for some of our students. We are awaiting the commissioner's guidance on school reopening. He has a large task force. Fire Chief Condon is serving on that task force, I believe in his role as president of the Mass Fire Chiefs Association. And several other folks are participating, educators, business leaders, and others to help guide a possible opening for schools in the Commonwealth. In the meantime, we're not waiting. We have established locally here in the Needham Public Schools 5 task forces, one on teaching and learning, one on technology infrastructure, health and wellness, operations, and student support services to plan for school reopening. Unfortunately, I don't think the commissioner's advice and guidance is going to come out until later in June. And quite frankly, it's already too late to begin planning for next year. But we will certainly use that guidance. And we will also depend on the COVID-19 Advisory Committee, which is really our public-facing committee. School committee members, our school committee chair, Andrea Longo-Carter, and I co-chair this committee. There are public health officials on it, town staff, school staff, parents, a student, and they will provide guidance and advocacy as we move forward, not just to September, but next year, because we imagine this will go on for a while. Lastly, people ask me a lot, so what are you losing sleep over these days? And I will tell you, it's these 4 items. And primarily and first, it's the loss in learning, relationships, and achievement experienced by all of our students. There's no question that it will be a challenge to gain some of that back, and some of it, frankly, is just lost. I'm also concerned about the mental toll and the social and emotional toll this pandemic has taken on students and families in particular, and of course our staff. We don't even know yet how some families have been impacted, and we're learning, and we'll learn more, I'm sure, as school resumes in the fall. I'm also wondering whether or not our schools and our families will be prepared for a new normal. There may be some families who reject coming back to school if school starts in a new normal way, or who will be concerned about that, or who will not feel we are adequately prepared. The last piece that I'm concerned about is the ability of the staff, our staff and town staff, to manage health protocols effectively, including what that means in schools, social distancing, the maintenance and cleaning of schools. I know we have the staff that's talented and is well equipped. That's not the concern. I'm just worried about whether or not, depending on what the health protocols are, do we have the tools, do we have the time, do we have the capacity to really maintain clean buildings and the health protocols that will be necessary to provide for students. So I will stop sharing that right now, Mr. Chair, and that really provides context for the conversation around our FY20 budget and also FY21. And I'd just like to share a couple things, and in a moment I'll turn it over to Ann. I know that you had questions about capital regarding technology. As far as FY20 is concerned, you know, I had come to this committee earlier this year, BC, before COVID, and said that we would be looking for a possible large reserve fund transfer request. At that time, we were very concerned about our special education costs, our salary costs. And so in January, after Ann and I consulted with the school committee, we did a couple of things. One, we put a frost, if you will, on our budget. And we told on January 15th, all of our principals and budget managers that we would only be hiring an essential staff member. For example, the teacher who went out sick and had to be replaced and had a classroom full of children awaiting that teacher. We would not be hiring for some other positions we could hold off on. For example, a technology assistant or an administrative assistant. And then we also held back on supplies and services. That going from January 15th through now has saved significant dollars and been very helpful. However, what really also saved dollars was the COVID-19 emergency. As a result of closing down schools, there were many services, supplies not needed. There were special education tuitions that were very costly that we ended up not needing and not having to spend for. And there were transportation costs and other contracted costs that we just did not have to pay the full amount for. So as a result, and outlined in Ann's memo, there is a healthy balance of over, we anticipate, of over $1 million. And as Ann's memo outlines, and now I can talk about FY21, I will recommend to the school committee that they use those funds to move into next year. Not because, unlike in years past, we have needs that are not addressed in the budget. For example, we've often come at this part of the year and we have new and identified special education placements that we don't have in our budget. That's not the case this year. We actually feel that the budget that you supported and that the school committee advocated for is a healthy budget and reflects all of our needs and real needs. Right now, though, that balance, that surplus that we may end up with, I believe will be essential in FY21 to address some of the things I just talked about that are going on in the schools. We're very concerned about, for example, in special education, we know that we will be providing additional services for students in special education that will be required to provide. We know that there will be services for children who are not in special education who will be behind, and that we want to be able to assist and provide services for not just the summer, but throughout all of next year, perhaps longer. We know that there will be protocols in place, unknown, regarding transporting students to school. What does that look like? If we had to, for example, insist that we limit the number of students on a bus, right now the high school bus, for example, in the morning has 3 high school students to a seat. That's 6 across. If we had to limit that in any way, we would need to purchase more buses, which, by the way, are not necessarily available. I mean, a fleet of buses. Each bus costs $80,000 approximately a year. So those costs grow significantly. Additionally, we're thinking about what we might need to do to adjust the curriculum, make sure that our technology infrastructure is robust, because we anticipate at some point it's likely we'll go back to a remote learning environment. I'm hoping that's not the case, but we have to plan for it being the case. And those are just some of the areas that I'm concerned about for FY21, where I believe those dollars will be important. Additionally, we have no idea what the state budget will look like. And I know that that's a concern for you, as I know it is a concern for Mr. Davison and the town manager as well. We don't anticipate a state budget for many months to come. So what we are planning on doing at this point with our FY21 budget is we hope it will continue to have the support of you and town meeting on June 8th, and that it will be passed. And then immediately on July 1, we are going to hold back. We will not be implementing any of the program improvements. I believe on the town side, those are DRS4s. We will hold off on those. We will not be hiring staff that may not be absolutely essential and critical to open school. And we will not be purchasing service, conducting extra professional development. There's some that we will have to conduct, or purchasing supplies. We're going to hold off for at least another $500,000 to $750,000 in services and supplies through October town meeting, just to make sure that we can sit down with everyone, understand what the state's budget will be and support for the town will be, and then use available resources to pivot and to meet the needs of our students. I will say one last thing, and I want you to know this, that while we are currently finishing up and wrapping up negotiations, thanks to our school committee and Alex Montes McNeil and Ann Gulati, we conducted negotiations with 5 employee groups. We've essentially wrapped them all up at this point. There's one more meeting for the school committee to review some final information. And so it's not possible for me to go into all the details. But what I do want you to know, that over the next 3 years, the average annual COLA for all 3 employee groups is 1.4%. That's because the school committee has been thinking about and working with certainly the town side and understanding how we can be fair to our employees as we look around the neighborhood, and also being thoughtful about the resources the town has generously provided. So with that, and as we think about our enrollment growing by about 65 students next year, we know there are a lot of needs to be met in the schools. We also know there are a lot of needs to be met in the town. And all of us are dealing with this emergency, and we may have to pivot and think differently about how we are making some things happen. For now, I'm confident in our plan to move forward, and I know that we will work with the school committee, with the finance committee, the town meeting, and certainly with the town manager and her team to make sure that we address the needs that I've outlined and that the community will expect. Finally, it may be that, or I know that Anne has a couple of comments she wanted to make about the technology capital budget. So, Mr. Chair, if that's all right, or we can take questions now, but maybe get to technology and answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Anne, why don't you go ahead and talk about the technology component, and then I will go through the finance committee members one by one so they can ask questions and make comments.
I think we just wanted to say about the technology, not so much, what we say every year, but that we have been trying to be flexible with our technology resources, and hope, of course, that town meeting is able to appropriate all of the requests that we have for FY21. But we are thinking about technology, about what we need to have in students' hands for remote learning going forward into not only the summer, but the next year. We are planning to submit a request through the municipal CARES money, the money that the town has received, for items including potentially laptops and devices for elementary students, so that if we are indeed in a hybrid or a remote learning environment next year, we will be able to have a meaningful educational experience for all of our kids. So that's really all I wanted to say about that. I'm happy to answer any questions, of course, that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you both for that information and for your memo that you got to us earlier. I'm going to start with the school liaisons, and I'll ask John Connolly if you have any questions or comments.
Just a few for now, because I guess I'll start off with a sense request. I'd like to schedule a liaisons meeting for sometime in the next 2 weeks. I think it's important for us to meet, and so I look forward to people getting back as to when we can do that. The CARES funding, and the slide was a little quick for me at least. Was it 80,000 or 800,000?
So 80,000. There are multiple CARES Act monies that are available. So the one that was allocated and directly to the schools was 81,000, and that is for summer school.
So would that be in supplement to the 1.2 million that you're projecting to carry over from FY20 into FY21?
Correct.
Okay. And in your memo, and Dan described it, sort of the two areas of what, with many components of what led up to the 1.2 between the hiring freeze on the one side and the shutdown on the second. What's, without the various components, but what are those two numbers that add up to the 1.2?
Well, I think it's actually three numbers. When earlier in the year, we believed that we were possibly in a zero budget situation, meaning that we would spend everything, or even a negative situation with special education needs that we had identified, you know, as early as September, December of the current fiscal year. So in January, we began a series of measures to really conserve funds. So we implemented a holdback of budget funds. That was, we implemented a holdback of budget funds, and that was actually followed by a second holdback of budget funds in April, in concert with the town. So we saved about $420,000 by simply withholding budget funds from the department managers and saving them. We also implemented in January hiring frost. I learned that term today from Dave Davison, and I'm going to add it to my lexicon because I like it very much. A hiring frost, and that has saved us about $255,000. It was really about not filling vacancies that had come open for a little over 5.5 administrative and teaching assistant positions. And then Dan, and that was about $255,000. And the third number was about $500,000 worth of savings that have resulted directly from the COVID-19 school closure. And those are in the areas of salary, and they come from a couple different things. For instance, the spring season for athletics was canceled, and we saved funds. Unfortunately, the district saved money on the spring coaches. We didn't have to pay. We also saved a significant amount in the area of substitute teachers, because when school was remote, there was no need for those substitutes. We didn't fill vacancies when we were remote. We actually worked around them. Professional development and curriculum development monies. So it's really the sum of those three things.
Okay, so would that be fair to say then that approximately, I'm just using round numbers and just trying to be, use general descriptions, around 700,000 for the category that I'm going to call holdbacks, and 500,000 for the category I'm going to call COVID?
I think you're right about that. Yes.
Okay. And then my next, and it's going to be a request, it's not a question, but going forward is, and I know from a liaison's point of view, we're going to want sort of a tracking with respect to how that 1.2 million is spent and is going to be spent subsequent to July 1st. And then a tracking as well of components of the FY21 budget that Dan in his presentation described are going to be held back from July through October. I'd like those carefully tracked, because I think it's going to be important for us to be able to understand them and put our arms around them as we work for the FY22 budget.
Absolutely.
So that's my request. It's not a question. And Tom, that's all that I have right now.
You're muted.
Tom, you muted. Yeah.
Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry. Tried to be good there, and then I forgot I was muted. Barry, do you have any questions or comments?
I just want to make sure I understand the different moving pieces real quick. So there's 1.2 from the current fiscal year we're in that you want to roll forward, and potentially another incremental 5 to 750 that you're going to hold back in the fiscal 21 budget to assess your needs, you know, so potentially a total of $2 million that you will then, in your minds, have to redeploy or to use or to assess potential needs at that point. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's correct, to assess potential needs and also to see where the state budgets land.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of it too. Those funds, again, our plan is we will wait till October town meeting, and once the town has greater clarity on where we are, that will help us with some decision making.
If I
just
might
from
also-
Go ahead, Ann.
Sorry, if I might also add that one of the concerns that we have around the revenue situation, which has been a feature of past difficult budget times at the state, is that circuit breaker is one of those accounts that is easy to reduce and is often at risk. And our budget request to you assumes that we will receive $1.6 million in that account. And I think that's a bit of a risky assumption at this point. So we're hoping that we do receive that, but planning for maybe not receiving it.
No, I think that's fair, and that gives good perspective. I guess the only question I have, and it's really more from a process standpoint. So at the point in time where you assess what your needs are, is there is that something that has to come back to town meeting or to us in terms of approval, or the plan is the money essentially is almost in your account to be used as you guys feel you have needs without having to go through any sort of review process with us?
I guess the way I would answer that, Barry, and members of the committee, is that I think in the last 14 years I've been doing this, we have, the school committee has worked with the finance committee and the town manager to say, all right, we have these unusual needs, or this unusual year, or we have a surplus, or we have a need for funding, and we have figured that out collaboratively. I don't recall in 14 years the school committee unilaterally saying, you know what, we've got a budget, thanks very much. I know that's not what you're suggesting, and I don't anticipate that will be the case at all. Instead, what I hope, if I think about the next month or two, I hope I can come to the school committee sometime in early July as we end the fiscal year with a possible plan for what school will look like in the fall, and have them approve that as necessary. Some of it will be guidance from the state, some of it won't necessarily need an approval, but I certainly want the school committee to weigh in on what our plan is. To the degree any of that involves funding, it will have to be funding that the school committee already has, either already appropriated at town meeting in anticipation of the new fiscal year. And if the plan that we're proposing automatically eats into a significant chunk of that money, and I don't anticipate that to be the case, well, then certainly I think the school committee would want to sit down with the finance committee and say, look, this is what we are planning on doing with the funds. Right now, I don't anticipate that because I don't think we have any idea what the cost might be. I think technology, as Ann outlined, is one area that we probably are going to need to work on. We're hoping that there might be some space in that with the funds the town received as part of the CARES Act. But I guess the best way to say it is that I anticipate, as has always been the case, we will have these funds. I think John's advice to track this carefully is something we will absolutely do. And we will keep coming back to, in the central office, we'll come back to the school committee and our liaisons in the finance committee, and ultimately town meeting, to manage the funds that we have to make sure we're meeting our student needs. I'll finally say this. If I believe as superintendent of schools in October that there is a need for additional funding because of the circumstances we're in at that time, I will absolutely advocate through the school committee for those additional funds beyond what is appropriated. I don't know that to be the case. I have no idea, but I had no idea we'd be in this situation we find ourselves. So in any event, we will make sure that we closely communicate and collaborate with you and with the town manager's office to make sure that we're all on the same page.
All right, thank you.
Is that it, Barry?
Yes, thanks.
Great. Carol, I'll turn to you now.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Just two questions, if I might. You saw significant savings in the spring, some savings associated with, as you said, sports that didn't happen, tuitions that you didn't pay. Have you factored that at all, or thought about that potential for the fall and the increased expenses due to COVID? Or are you just focusing on the additional expense side? I mean, I know it's hard to know.
Yeah. Right now, I'm anticipating schools including special education schools that service Needham's children, will open in September. That's the plan right now that is on everyone's mind. We're kind of, I don't want to say walking toward that yet, but that's what we're anticipating. That's what we hope is out there for all of our schools and all of our students. And so that includes fall sports. That includes students going to the Landmark School in Beverly and being transported to the New England Children's Center in Natick. So I anticipate that's what we're doing. So we're not planning on right now redirecting those funds. However, again, depending on the circumstances and the situation, we can, we'll certainly be able to, have a better idea once we get into August and September.
And then on transportation costs, to the extent that you have to, I guess the word they're using is de-densify your student population on buses. I mean, will you is there a way to kind of survey parents? I mean, I would imagine that parents, if they're still working remotely, might be less inclined to put their children on a bus in the first place. So how will you manage that? How will you rationalize that?
That's also one of the things that keeps Ann up at night and keeps me up at night. What about bus service and our amazing transportation director, Shane Marchand? We are in the process. We're delayed this year because we needed to go online with our registration process for transportation. We hope it will kick off in the next couple of days. And I think that will give us an opportunity to gauge where families are regarding bus service. We have a great bus service. We hope parents will sign their children up. And we also know that if parents wholesale decide not to take the bus, the town has a secondary problem. That has to do with crossing guards, traffic, congestion, that presents a whole nother set of challenges. So we believe bus transportation is the safest way to get to school. We also believe that we are going to work with our bus vendors. There are 3 big bus vendors, Conley, Locomotion, and Vanpool, providing special education transport. We will work with them to follow guidelines, public health guidelines. I don't know what those are right now. And yes, some families will make decisions that will impact the bottom line. All of that will have to unfold over the next several weeks and months.
Okay. And then to the extent that Needham has a plan for how they go back to school in the fall, is it a unified plan kind of across the state? Do you have to do what Newton is doing or what Dover is doing, or how is that going to work?
That's a great question. And it reminds me too that we have partners in Needham, St. Joe's, Monsignor Haddad, St. Sebastian's, the Walker School. Olin College is in a different position, obviously. And we'll be checking in with them as well on their plans. We provide transportation for St. Joe's students, for example. We don't know what the commissioner's guidance is going to say. I had expected that there was going to be more clarity and that there'd be more of a direction rather than just an advisory. I'm not sure what's going to happen after a conversation I had on a conference call with the commissioner today. I think there's going to be just more guidance rather than specific direction. If that's the case, that could be problematic for communities because we all essentially need to be doing this pretty much the same thing because our communities are so interconnected. We have about 1,000 full and part-time employees in the Needham Public Schools. 200 of them live in Needham. 100 live in Boston. And the rest live in every community from New Hampshire to Rhode Island in between. And so if every community is essentially doing their own thing, and that's going to impact childcare, it's going to impact families, and really makes a patchwork response to something that I think is more regional in nature. I would like it to be a regional response. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, Josh, I'll turn to you now. Do you have any questions, comments?
Sure, thank you. I had a couple questions. So in your presentation, Dan, I noticed that you said the average of 4.15 hours per week of direct live instruction. It's good compared to other towns, but I guess compared to typical in-classroom education, it seems quite low. And so I guess in the event that there is some sort of remote component in the fall, it sounds like maybe more resources will certainly have to be rejuggled around to make sure that the quality and quantity of education is as similar as possible to in-person classroom learning. If that's the case, and in October you come back and say that you need more funds for things like personal learning devices, staff laptops, other sorts of technological needs that make it more feasible for more hours of classroom learning and higher quality learning remotely, I should say. I feel like we need to have the capacity to grant those additional funds. I mean, I'd prefer not to be taking from other departments' budgets in order to increase the school's budget in that case. And so when it comes to the capital requests, particularly the school technology and school furniture, just to be clear, the school technology in this case is for capital requests of items having more than a 5-year lifetime. So that doesn't include the digital learning devices that students have. It doesn't include the staff laptops. I guess I would be in favor of foregoing those for the time being in anticipation that in the fall things could be reshuffled around, maybe applied to the digital learning devices that are needed. The same also for school furniture. I know, Anne, you didn't talk to this, but it seems like school furniture could fall in the same bucket. If there isn't as much classroom learning, that could be held off on as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do want to be clear about a couple of things, though, Josh, and I appreciate you bringing that up. What we're doing now in our remote learning plan is the plan that we put together essentially over a weekend. I've used the metaphor "all hands on deck," and I've been telling folks that a remote learning plan in many ways is like the victory ships of World War II. That were those of you who are history buffs know we needed to get equipment very quickly overseas, and it took months and months and months to build frigates and ships because they were welded together and rather riveted together. And someone figured out how to throw together a Liberty ship that's welded together. Now they didn't last forever, and in fact some of them broke apart at sea, but most of them were successful in delivering their supplies across the ocean, the Atlantic and Pacific. And by the way, we won the war. Our remote learning plan has been pretty much a Liberty ship. It's done the job, but it's not going to last the duration. And so over the summer, where I think we will need funds and where we will spend the funds that are in our budget already, are on training for our teachers and professional development. That's what they need. I'm hoping the devices and the laptop that we'll be able to, through federal grants or local funds, be able to provide for the devices we need for our students and staff. Where we will need resources and where we have to pivot is to provide more professional development, think differently about a remote learning plan, because the expectation will be a greater amount of contact with students and learning, depending on the circumstances.
If I could add to that answer. Part of what is important, a portion of the capital request is actually related to the wireless infrastructure, that the network and all of those things that we use and we operate our devices on. So one of the things that's going to be important for us in a remote learning environment is actually to maintain those network infrastructure and resources.
No, that makes sense. I'm just looking at the warrant. So it looks like 473,000 of the school technology request would be for hardware, and then 113,000 would be for that infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
If I could ask a question, this is Garrett. Can folks hear me?
Yes, Josh, are you all set?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Garrett.
Dan, you listed a few things. I made notes here. I guess the question I have is, what is the one single thing that you're most concerned about in terms of impacting what you have to do? Is it the reserve fund transfer, or is it just pick that one out, but which one is it the most concern to you?
Well, fortunately, what's no longer a concern is the reserve fund transfer.
Right.
And I appreciate the Finance Committee, even when we brought that to your attention a while ago, being thoughtful and working with us. So,
I'll cross that off the list.
yeah, so that's good news. And I hope will provide some flexibility for us to be nimble in FY21 as we face this pandemic. As I said earlier, I think I'm mostly concerned about our students who have lost out on their learning, their relationships. I'm concerned about their social and emotional health, and making sure that we get it right when they come back to school in the fall. And if we are not in school in the fall immediately, or if we have to leave for a period of time, that whatever our remote learning plan is robust enough to capture students in a different way than we've been able to date.
Yeah. Thanks much.
Anything else, Gary? You all set?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Great. Dick?
Thanks, Tom. One question got nothing to do with technology, and then I'm going to dive into technology a bit. When is the date when people who have kids now in private school would have to elect to go to public school? I'm raising the question of, I expect a lot of parents are sitting out there questioning spending $50,000 for a remote learning exercise. And at some point, is there a concern that there could be a dramatic shift in school attendance?
I don't know what all the different deadlines are. Frankly, I think acceptances, I know, to many private schools have already been received, and I presumably parents to put down deposits for the fall semester. I will say, even though this event is unlike anything we've experienced in the last 100 years since Needham last went through the pandemic, private school enrollment has remained pretty steady over ups and downs in the economy in Needham. We have about 20% of our students, school-age population, that are enrolled in private school. Even during the recession and at other times, that's remained steady since the 1990-91. This could change that. We don't have any indication right now through enrollment that I'm aware of that there is a spike in that. I have not been made aware of that. We're on track to meet our enrollment projection. Beyond that, I don't know. And that could change, Dick, you're right. That could change as we get to the fall.
I expect it may be a bigger problem for school year 21-22, arguably, because I think you're right. People have probably made a commitment already, have put the money down, and then may or may not reassess. Well,
please tell me that we're not going to keep going through this in 21-22.
Well, you don't know what 2021 is going to be like. On the technology thing, there's roughly just under $590,000 in the cash capital article for technology. And it's identified, as Josh indicated, the split between hardware and related material. Do you see any significant change in the allocation in those amounts relative to hardware and to systems type of related activities?
I think not especially. So nothing with regard to the infrastructure piece, especially the networking and the hardware that underlies everything. And in fact, nothing really in terms of the hardware, which is the other component piece. I would say that there are a few tweaks from the prior years. Some of those tweaks have to do with, for instance, as more building systems become technology intensive, they start to not be able to talk to one another. So one of the things we've wrapped into this capital plan, for instance, is paging clocks and airphones, making them in the school part of the technology infrastructure as opposed to simply something on the wall. So there is a little bit of that, and there is classroom AV projection. I know it's important for some of our hearing impaired students to have sound field systems installed in some of the classrooms. So that infrastructure is part of what's the hardware component of the request. But generally speaking, there aren't very many changes from the prior years.
Okay. Tom, that was my principal question. I'm satisfied.
Thank you. Rick? Rick, can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Just a couple comments and maybe one question. Your Liberty ships were built quickly, but you certainly coated them with nice white paint, and you should be complimented. I sit across the hall from one of your teachers who teach every day, and I watched in awe that a program that was driven in one service delivery model just shift dramatically. And our kids here are extremely well served. And so a big credit to your team. And it really shouldn't go unnoticed by anybody. And it really should be raised to the folks at town meeting in terms of the monumental steps in service delivery that it's taken. But having said all that, congratulations on making that work so quickly. A couple questions. Given what you know now, taking an inbound kind of service delivery to a remote, do you intend to accelerate the elementary device distribution? Because I can remember way back when we first talked about this, we sat here and pulled you apart about devices, take home, they're going to lose them. Have it come full circle. Has that accelerated anything?
It's a good question. And first of all, I appreciate you acknowledging what our teachers have done. Our teachers preschool through high school, we've done this unevenly and imperfectly, and there's a lot of room for growth. But in a very quick amount of time, our teachers, and I would say and acknowledge our special educators, have really, really risen to the occasion to, as I said, reinvent themselves in a short span of time to make sure they're connecting with students. And I will put them up against any teachers in the Commonwealth, particularly in the neighborhood, as I mentioned, for what they're doing and what they'll continue to do, and as they will improve in the fall. The elementary devices is a question the principals have been asking about. What we would probably like to do, what we would like to do and think about, if we can figure out the funding, is to provide for a device, particularly for K through 3, an iPad likely, because it's easier for a youngster to manage. But it would be a school device and would remain at school, unless, of course, the student is going to be learning remotely. So we're not looking as we have at High Rock and above, where those devices are brought back and forth from school to home. These would be devices that would be used in school and as necessary at home for an extended illness or because school is closed for a period of time.
Is that kind of thought embedded in the 500,000 we just heard about, or is that above and beyond the money we're looking at now?
It's above and beyond the money we're looking at now.
Okay. Second question, and I'm not going to call this a saving, but special education tuition expense postponement from pretty much this term. How much is that? Do you have a sense?
I think so.
But let me tell you where I'm going with this. Is it earmarked for anything besides clairvoyancy, waiting to see what happens in the fall? Is it earmarked for anything, or what will you do with it?
So we know that there is a need for extended school year services. We have a certain amount of money in our budget now for extended school year summer school, if you will, for our special needs students. And we think that might need to be bolstered. We might have a more expansive need because of certain kids who really have, struggled with some of the remote learning pieces, may need some additional experience in the summer. We're a little concerned with having to provide additional services next year to compensate for things that couldn't be done this year. We're concerned that the circuit breaker account, which is that sort of other pot of money that is outside of our budget that supports all of the tuitions, is going to be cut by the state because it has been cut in the past and fairly significantly. And that's a real fear because, as I mentioned, that we are assuming we will receive $1.6 million toward these tuitions from the state in that area. And if that goes away, that's $1.6 million. That's a hole in our budget.
If I may add to that, that one component of our planning and our programming that's kind of it's difficult to talk about, but I'll mention this, and it is related to special education, and it's related to a particular aspect called compensatory services. If a family believes and they convene a team meeting, which is the special educators and the family, and the team determines that a child has not received the educational services required during the school year or during the school day, then the school is obligated to provide those services outside of the school day. Those could be services at home. We could be obligated to be providing therapies at home. We do some of that right now, although we haven't been able to do that really at all recently. We would have an extended day or an extended school year for children. We have a budget for an extended school year, and I want to say it's about $260,000.
Approximately that, a little under 300.
Approximately. And that provides for summer programming for up to 300 students. So the Newman School, for example, is actively used throughout the summer, beginning on July 1 and running through the third week in August, with up to 300 students and teachers working together to meet their needs. What we're worried about is that that number could balloon because of the situation we find ourselves in. Our special educators and our teachers and principals and special education folks have been working really hard and with families very closely. We just don't know where that's going to go. And it could go beyond the summer and into the fall and even into next year or beyond, depending on a child's growth, his trajectory, her needs, all of it unknown. And that's one of the pieces that we're hoping that we can use these funds to be flexible with.
Gotcha. Lord knows there's all kinds of issues that are unknown at the moment. I'm going to swing back to my other question. If you can't do it now, I'd be interested to know truly how much that special tuition postponement number is. That would be helpful.
You're talking about the amount of money that we did not pay out to special education schools?
Yeah, that's why I'm calling it a postponement, because you're going to end up spending it somewhere somehow. But I'd be curious to what that number is.
Do we know what that number is right now, Ann, or no?
Yes, I think I can actually get that for you if you give me about 30 seconds.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and I'm going to assume that that number is really the difference between what we were expecting tuition to cost in March,
Yeah.
right when schools closed, and what we expect it to be now.
Mr. Chair, I know that number off the top of my head, but we'll let Ann go through this exercise.
You don't need to do it now, Frank. Truly, I don't want to take your time.
Nope, I have it actually, so I can provide it for you. It looks.
It's 8 o'clock.
It looks like about $125,000.
That's that, Rick?
Thank you.
Are you all set?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Welcome.
So last and least is me. I have a couple of questions. One clarification. I think I heard there was a 3-step process that you were going to follow starting FY21 to control some expenses. You weren't going to implement any new programs. You were going to limit hiring, and there was a holdback on services. and supplies of $750,000. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that the 3 steps that is about right. We're going to, first of all, hold back on supplies, services, appropriate professional development, because we will need some. That might include conferences, for example, and up through town meeting, and then we'll reassess where we are. We also, we do have in our budget request for FY21 approximately 14 FTEs, full-time equivalents, most of those special education folks. We will go forward with hiring unless there is a position, and we'll know more about this as we get closer, that we might be able to hold back on. We know, for example, that we hire a lot of teacher assistants late in the summer. Depending on where we are in the summer, we can reassess where we are with teacher assistants. And then did we get all 3? What was the third piece?
The new programs.
So there actually was a modest, overall, a modest amount in program improvements approved by the school committee and forwarded to the finance committee. It's around $80,000 in programming. We will hold off on that until we get into the fall.
So, so you started to hit upon my question with regard to the new hires that were approved during the budget process. So when you say the limit hiring, that doesn't necessarily mean those positions will not be hired.
No, actually, those positions will be necessary regardless of our most of those positions. They're special educators or professional teachers will be needed regardless of whether we are in school or in a remote learning environment. So we're in the process of recruiting, interviewing, and all of that, of course, is contingent upon town meeting. But yes, we will move forward with that plan.
Okay. And so the 750 number includes all 3 categories. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. So the question of the circuit breaker, obviously it's a significant number to the 1.6 million, if I remember that correctly. But your contingency plan, should it not materialize?
Well, let me say this. There in my 14 years, there has never been a year when the state has not funded some portion of circuit breaker. Now it's gone down, and I want to say to 35%, if I'm right.
I think it was 35. Then it was at 50 for a while, and that was really when the state was having some budget difficulties several years ago.
Yeah, and it's maxed out, at least in recent memory, to 75%. So I can't. The state's going to have many choices that it has to make, and the legislature and governor. Circuit breaker is a likely target, but I can't imagine that would evaporate entirely. Communities across the Commonwealth would not be able to, particularly with that population of students, would not be able to operate in the same way. So I'm hoping it's close to 75%, but any number close to that will be a lot better than at the other end of 35%.
And what's the timing on when we'll know what that number is? Is it early in the year or the end of the year?
We know what the state budget, when the state budget's passed.
Okay.
We actually don't find out what the percentage is until even after that. It's usually later in the fall, right around October-ish. So, yeah.
Maybe discussing
You don't, but you do have you get an indication through the state budget what it will look like. Which is why we can do some pretty good planning and projecting in our budget.
Okay. And last, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, Dr. Kuntz. How would you respond to, like I say myself, since I'm a resident, saying that since it is such an uncertainty what the revenues may be, shouldn't we tear apart the budget? And I don't mean just the school budget, but we'll talk about the school budget because that's your area. Shouldn't we tear it down and cut dramatically to make sure that we don't overspend? And what is your response to that, and why we should or shouldn't do that?
I would say to a Needham resident who asked me that question that I would argue strongly that it would be the complete wrong move to take a well-considered budget that was certainly BC. There's no question about that, but that was thoughtfully designed to meet our strategic priorities that we've laid out, that still exist and will exist beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, and make sure that we have the infrastructure in place with our teaching staff, because most of the request for new staff, actually all of it essentially, is for special educators. And that was done intentionally to build up that infrastructure to provide for our students now and into the next several years. It would take us backward and put us in we're already in a precarious situation because of the pandemic in relationship to special education students. This would exacerbate that problem and make it worse. So I think the budget, unwittingly, actually does meet a need, a growing need that we have that we didn't know about last January, even more so. Further, I'd advise town meeting, I'd advise a resident against tearing up the entire budget, because I think it is a well-considered plan. And the reality is the students are not going away. Our enrollment will be increasing next year by any number of 50 to 70, notwithstanding private school students, and we will need to meet their needs. We will have to provide services for them, whether it's in the house, whether it's in the schoolhouse or at home or a hybrid. We still would be responsible for their services. This budget, I think, is well considered and will address their needs. That doesn't mean, though, that we can't work with the school committee, the finance committee, and with town meeting to press pause on certain spending until we all have greater clarity. It'd be foolish of me to say we should just go right ahead and spend whatever we have and whatever we want because town meeting approved a budget. Instead, just as the Needham School Committee has done in the 14 years I've been here, we've worked collaboratively with the resources we've had. Yes, we haven't always agreed, but we've ultimately come together to say this is what the spending plan is, and let's work together to make sure that it is carefully spent. And every year at the end of the year, we've come to our finance committee liaisons, at least since I've been superintendent, and we've said, this is what we believe we're going to have left over. How can we best spend it? And to Mr. Conley's earlier point about tracking it in the new year, I think that will help the finance committee, town residents, and taxpayers understand that all the funds the school department will get, and I know this is true on the town side as well, will be carefully spent, and it will be done in collaboration, particularly during this time, with all of the town boards, so that the community can feel confident that our kids are getting the right education and that the dollars are being spent wisely.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much. Do any finance committee members have any follow-up questions or comments that they'd like to make before I let
this is Garrett. I just, sorry, which I can't figure out how, I can't figure out what the order is. Is it okay if I make a comment?
the order is that I'll call on people, but go ahead, Garrett.
Okay, no, call on people.
Question?
I just haven't figured it out. So,
Okay. At this time, I'm just adding people to raise their hand if they have follow-up. Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, Dan, you mentioned the possibility of laptops for the primary grades. When do you think you'll be making that decision? Do you have a sense of what the cost of that is?
It would be, I want to be clear, what we were thinking about for the youngest students are iPads, which will just be easier for them to navigate and they're a little bit more intuitive for them. The good news is that we have in our classrooms different iPad carts that you have supported through the budget over the years. So we have some of these carts available in the classrooms. We don't have a final cost on what that would be, at least, Ann, I don't believe we do if we had to get more, but we're working on that. So
We have an idea. It's about $500,000.
More than I had in mind.
Yeah, more than I had in mind. I was unaware it was that number. So, but I know that we're working on it, and
That number's hot off the presses as of today. People are still working on that, trying to figure out what the components of it are, but
Get it down to 145,000. I may have something for you.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Y'all set, Dick?
Yep.
Garrett, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment of all the services. Yeah, I've been in Needham longer than any other town. I've kind of bounced around a bit. And I think and part of the reason I'm here in Needham is the education that is provided. My kids are all grown, but education to me is the most valuable resource that the town provides. I just wanted to make that comment. And even though my kids are all done school, I get the sense that from people I know that have kids in public school here, it's still highly regarded and well received.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Dan and Ann, thank you very much for taking a lot of your time, but we really appreciate you coming back and giving us some follow-up.
We appreciate it, Mr. Chair. We will schedule a liaison meeting in the next couple of weeks for the school committee and finance committee budget liaisons to take a deeper dive into the numbers.
I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just one note, I've got a text during our previous discussion on the agenda. Article 1 of the special town meeting has been withdrawn, the traffic study. So we will not be going through that, so there one less to do. So we'll take up the next item on the agenda, which is the general fund cash capital. We had 2 or 3 items that we had questions about. As you probably know, I think it's been distributed, right? The library space planning item has been withdrawn. And we just had some discussion about school technologies and the NIPDs. How do you say that? NIPDs, is that the proper?
Yeah, if I may make a comment.
Dick, you go ahead, take the lead on this one, Dick.
Yeah, the list that Kara sent us, if you looked at it, totaled 736,000. And on the warrant article, the item is for 770,000. The difference is an additional 34,500 for catch basin cleaning. I went through all of the items that are identified on that list that Karis gave us, and they all seem to make sense to me. If anyone's got any questions about specific ones, I've got a very thin veneer of knowledge about each one of them. So if you want to ask a question on one of them, I'll be happy to share my knowledge, but that's it.
Okay, so Garrett, just to restate, the order that people talk in is arbitrary by my choice.
Okay.
May I finish?
I'll wait to be called on.
I call upon people as I'm feeling it. So, Dick?
I think it's it. I've got a question I ask of Dave. The first 2 items on the cash capital item are being withdrawn. One for 84,000, the other for 60,000, or 144,000. Dave, what will happen to those dollars? They just go into free cash if they're not appropriated?
Mr. Chair, yes, anything, just as the articles that we've withdrawn from consideration that were proposed to be funded by free cash, that will all close out the fund balance in order to shore up the amount of free cash that would be available either for October if things are positive, or if we are still holding, taking a cautious approach, it would be available for funding appropriations next spring.
Okay, I mean, obviously the question I was asking Dan about the iPads for the primary school level was that going to be a potential use for that, but it's not going to be anywhere near enough. So I withdraw my concept.
Rick, you have any questions or comments?
No, no comments or questions.
Barry, how about you? No. Garrett, you have any?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Josh?
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, are we going to be supporting an amendment to the changes in these values, or has the select board already submitted an amendment?
Mr. Chair,
Go
the
ahead, Dave.
select board approved the amendment that is being recommended by the town manager, and it will be offered by the select board.
And are those, I just want to understand the lines that are being affected. So it's the library furniture being reduced to zero, space planning being reduced to zero. Is there a change in the NIPD's support projects?
No.
Okay. I guess I would feel comfortable making a motion to that the finance committee recommends that the NIPD support project funds be reduced to the amount recommended in Karis's most recent document that she sent. I don't have that in front of me right now. And then also, based upon my comments from earlier in the discussion, I think it would be prudent for now to reduce the school technology and school furniture requests in anticipation, or even just planning for the worst, that there would have to be additional funds to be allocated to the school budget in October, so that the school technology line item be reduced from 575 to 113,000. That would account for the infrastructure improvements, and that school furniture be reduced from 35,000 to $0.
Okay, Josh, if you can, we'll take one at a time here. So what's the rationale for taking out the 34,000 for the catch patients?
So Karis sent around a document with revised figures showing that the 770, the revised figures down from 7,500 to 736, I believe.
Yep. Dick, can you shed some light on this for me? You're muted, Dick. You're still on mute, Dick.
There we go. My discussion with Karis today, that list should have included 34,500 for catch basin cleaning, which is a function they need to do year in, year out. And there's no question that that is a legitimate function. So
I misunderstood that.
I would oppose the motion to amend that.
Okay, so there was just an oversight in the document then.
Right.
Correct.
So I'll withdraw that. I misunderstood the communication.
Okay, so let's take up the second one a little bit. Just if you could.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Dave.
I think I need to offer clarification for the Finance Committee. When I was speaking that if things are not looking positive in the fall, what I meant by that is our free cash would not be certified in time to have an appropriation in October. So if there was a reduction to school technology, for instance, and if the free cash was not certified in time for the October town meeting, those funds would not be available to appropriate technology in October. And I apologize to the committee if that wasn't clear.
Gotcha. So Josh, I don't know if you want to speak to your motion regarding the school technology, or should I just open up to the floor?
Well, I guess the overall question is, we don't know how bad COVID's going to be. Is this something that's going to linger into the 2021 to 22 school year? I'm concerned a little bit that that the revenues could be lower than anticipated. There are just so many unknowns right now that I think we should be conservative with our budgeting. And to the extent that some of these costs may not have an immediate need in the sense that there may be, there may be conditions under which there'd be remote learning and the in-person learning may not, there may not be an opportunity to take advantage of some of these school technology and school furniture allocations. I think we should be conservative in our budgeting and maybe save them for later.
Not to open a Pandora's box, but why this particular item versus others on the list?
I actually think that it's similar to the library furniture and space planning. The library reasoning is that it's very unknown. We don't know how people, in the case of the library, we don't know how people's use of the library is going to change as a result of this pandemic. We don't know how long the pandemic is going to last. So I think that the logic is very similar to the library funding.
There's one fairly significant difference. I got a lot of hands raised. I'll let other people talk. Go ahead, Carol.
So I think the significant difference, so I disagree with you, Joss. I think the difference is that the library furniture is associated with the required social distancing that we know will probably have to remain in place for some time. So simply the chairs that they thought they needed to order, they do not need any longer. And the space planning was something that really had nothing to do with COVID. We discussed earlier, kind of pre-COVID, the lack of a real need for space planning. Part of that was to accommodate the automated book sorter that was taken out of the budget. Number two, I think that Dan Gutenkantz and his team are operating under the assumption that they are going back in some manner in the fall. So I do think you're going to see some hybrid mode, if you will. And I think, again, we're going to have to they are going to have to think about how to de-densify their schools and their classrooms. So I would argue that at least on the furniture side, they're going to need the additional furniture and probably the school technology that they're attempting to put in place. So I would not recommend that we attempt to reduce that component of the budget.
Rick?
The question I asked Dan relative to the elementary purchasing of devices to prepare them from home, I was quite taken back a little bit because I would have thought they would have certainly tried to figure out a way how to pay for that stuff relatively quickly so they could take advantage of moving forward with their preparedness for working remotely, because it's certainly a need. And I would think that probably they may be shifting their goals. If it looks like the fall is closer to remote or partially remote or at least a piece remote, they may need those funds to go in that direction, because I don't think the devices they have in those carts will sustain their need for the entire elementary system. So I think they should stay there.
So just a clarification, I think the iPads are have a life of less than 5 years. That's my understanding. So if they needed to purchase iPads or wanted to purchase iPads for the elementary kids, that would come out of the school budget rather than the capital items.
Okay. Okay.
Dick?
Yeah, a couple of things. On the merits, I think the library, I think more than just the COVID issue, you may recall that the price per chair was $2,000 per chair. So I think on the merits, there was going to be an issue on that library item. Secondly, I think going forward, it's very probable that the technology needs of the school are going to grow rather than decline. And there is flexibility under this article. As long as they spend it on technology, they can actually spend it on items other than they've identified in the warrant article. It must be spent on technology, but it can be spent on newer elements of the technology that they determine they need to deal with going forward. So I think it's very unlikely that their technology budget is going to go down. It may change, but it's not going to go down.
So I guess I have a clarification question. Is it, this is for a capital budget request. So all of the monies have to be spent on technology that can last at least 5 years or has an expected life of at least 5 years.
I believe that's
Right.
correct.
Just normally,
Should I say yes?
is that
Or
that
the
difference in this
infrastructure.
case?
Or the infrastructure, which presumably is more than 5 years.
I guess my understanding is that most of the technology needs for remote learning require laptop computers, for instance, which have an expected life of less than 5 years that are not in the capital budget. I'm just looking for ways in which we can save money in the hopes that we can restore it later on, but planning for maybe the worst case scenario where revenues are lower than what we expect.
I think that's prudent from a fiscal perspective, but as Dave mentioned, you run the risk of if these don't get certified in time, you can't access the dollars next October. Now, we can access them in May, presumably.
Yeah, and just to the broader question about being conservative, since we approved the budget in March, the town, Dave and his people in the town, we have reduced the budget by about $4.9 million. That is to a great extent the withdrawing of many warrant articles. And so I think, if you go through the whole process about how likely it is the revenues that Dave put out for us, which revenues are likely at which levels, it really is conservative. Even now, the total amount is actually different than what's in your warrant right now. The bottom line, instead of 201 million, is closer to 198 million. And that's due to more conservative projections and revenues by Dave. And then we have done corresponding reductions in expenses, as I said, mostly to a great extent, eliminating warrant articles. So your point's a great point, Josh. I think the town I think we've done a lot. I think we don't want to go too deep because then we handcuff ourselves in that we can't spend more than we approve on the budget. And we can spend less, and town management and school management will be prudent, particularly the first quarter of the year as we head to fall meeting, to make sure that they are not spending more than they're spending as little as they can, using Dave's term frost. I don't know if you invented that, Dave, but it's not quite a freeze, but a frost that apparently Ann likes as well. And I think that's the prudent move. So your point is a great point, and I applaud it and I agree with it. In this particular case, I'm perfectly comfortable with the cash capital as it's been reduced to at this point. Was it 4 million? Was it higher than 4 million at one point, or is this the original amount at 4.8 million?
No, it's down to 3.9 now.
It's down to 3.9
by 144,000.
Right. But there's other items that were not in this warrant article. $2.4 million in public works that was zeroed out, and so there's a number of items that have been reduced. So hopefully giving us a cushion to withstand reduction in revenues. I thought I saw someone raise their hand tonight.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Josh's school furniture thing. Frankly, Josh, I don't think that's material enough to have an impact one way or the other.
It's smaller than all the others. Can I just make a general comment, I guess?
Sure.
So from all our discussions, written communications from the town manager's office from Dave Davison, and then our discussion last week, it sounds like there will be a plan to amend the budget in October. I guess my preference, if we're assuming that the budget is going to be amended in October, then it seems like I would prefer to be able to have money left over to be able to spend in October, provided that it's certified as free cash, then to come back in October and say to town meeting that we have to cut positions or we have to cut funding in certain areas. I feel like that's going to be a much harder discussion to have with town meeting.
Well, I guess, and anybody else can jump in. The biggest component, obviously, is the operating budget, $190 million. And the issue of cutting that now is more difficult now than to have the discussion later, in part because we would have, to do it appropriately, we would have to go department by department and review and figure out where we could cut without devastating services. We are, the town is a service organization, and we need to make sure that we can continue to provide the services that the town is expect. And in some cases, there's going to be more services needed than less. So I am personally comfortable with keeping the operating budget the way it is and leaning on our town management and school management to manage those costs, to keep them as low as possible, particularly in the first quarter, as we better understand where the state revenues will come and how our local receipts and other receipts might be. So I'm okay with doing it the way we're leaning. The last thing I will say, that the amendment to the budget, I think for the most part, we won't be adding to the operating budget. It would be additional warrant articles, putting it back in, the ones that we threw this to a great extent. So it's not, we're not really talking about day-to-day operations in that regard. So Dick?
Yeah, just thinking in terms of Josh's question, something like that might be raised at the town meeting. I know we've gone down and paired many of the DSR4 requests, but is there a list of the DSR4s that are being left in the budget? Because theoretically, those might be the items that you would look at first that are new items as opposed to continuation of existing items. And we ought to be prepared to answer a question, particularly if one of our alumni gets smart and says, how about how many DSR4s are being approved and why? We ought to be prepared for that question.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So I did a little homework last night and I did prepare a list. If it's okay for you, could I share my screen?
Sure. Dave, can you make that happen?
You should be able to. Yep.
Okay.
That is. Let me know what you're seeing right now.
Excel spreadsheet with in the upper left-hand corner, the select board, town managers, and a lower right-hand number of 818,000.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah, so this is just a list of the DSR4s that I was looking at that we had approved back in February. And this, I should say, it doesn't include the health department ones. And I had, that's because I had in mind of things that we could cut, and I wasn't comfortable considering cutting health department DSR4s considering the current circumstances. But there is a DSR4 for the select board town manager for community events in the amount of $8,000. That's for things like the Blue Tree lighting, the finance department network security, applicant tracking, electronic health records for the youth services, the amount of $120,900. Planning community development for a design review recording secretary, $6,200. Police department for 2 new police officers. I should say also that this does not include any funding for benefits. This is only salary and expenses. School departments, this is the general program improvements that the school department outlined in a document that they had sent over. So it doesn't include special education teachers, I don't believe. DPW, the assistant building director, assistant building director of maintenance, custodian, fleet parts manager, and then additional funding in salaries for associated with rotary markings and overtime for Sunday RTS pickup. And then the expenses related to the above numbers, also some roof maintenance, vehicle washing, and then Parks and Rec, there was additional pool staffing.
Okay.
I feel like there's some items here that could be questioned by town meeting members as being necessary to be passed.
Okay, we'll open up to the floor discussion. I can't see everybody, so I gotta change my screen so I can see people. I can see Josh. All right. I can't see if anybody's raising their hands. Technical malfunction on my part.
It's Barry.
Go
Just
ahead.
one.
Go ahead, Barry.
I guess the question, it's not that this isn't a valid discussion that we should be having. I think the problem is we just don't know enough yet to really, if we don't know enough about what the revenues are going to be, we don't know enough about what the world's going to look like, whether there'll be will be by the end of fiscal 21, for example, will we be back to a more normal, day-to-day things? So some of these activities would be back to normal. And the reality is, if we're not, they're not going to be, the pool is not going to be open and won't be hiring these people. So I'm not sure. We can't put them back after they're taken out. And I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just trying to make sure we all understand the implications of making changes now.
Anybody else have a comment?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I agree with Barry, because some of the things that if you look down this list, some of them are pretty small. Some of them, the school department already discussed taking out the program improvements. I think that the pool and rec is self-limiting. I'm not comfortable in this environment. In the police department, they don't need 2 new police officers. You can argue that there's more of a need now than before. So it's good to have this list, as Dick said, so that we understand the answer. We can answer the question and discuss the fact that we've gone over the DSR4s and, pared it back to what we think is appropriate. But I don't think that right now we should be making any changes to these DSR4s.
Anybody else have a comment?
This is Garrett. Joshua, you did a nice job in laying things out, but I agree with the previous speaker. I don't see any reason to do anything right now.
Okay.
Tom,
Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
as I recall, we had extended discussion on the DPW, the custodians and so forth, but it seems to me in today's environment, deciding we need less cleaning is not a logical approach to take. Cleaning is going to be a major issue, so I think we could arguably slow the spending on some of these items, but I'm not inclined to say at this point, I think they should not be included in the budget. I think they should be.
I think the response from some town meeting members might be that, particularly for new employees, hiring new employees means benefits for those employees for as long as they work for the town, retirement benefits afterwards. And I think we may get a question, or do we really want to be in a position of hiring more people right now when other towns in the area are furloughing, And I would really not want to be in a position where we had to furlough any employees. I guess just to play devil's advocate, hiring new people now is increases not our liability, but our burden to keep these people employed for the duration of next year and however many years that follow. If this is going to be a very deep recession, and we don't know how long it's going to be, we may want to consider deferring some of these hires.
Yeah, I think Barry's point, though, is pretty relevant. We can always choose to defer if it's in the budget. If it's not in the budget, we can't decide we should have hired that person.
Rick?
I would share what Barry sees as a lack of vision. I'd like to think that even though this appropriation gets made, that Kate and company and those in charge and running the town would be able to act in real time, knowing certainly more than we know now, and decide in ways that are prudent and safe and appropriate for the town. And to kind of tie their hand now without the benefit of foresight, I think would be unfair to them and terribly imprudent for us. So I prefer just to leave it as it is, have this information there in case town meeting asks the question, and then probably we need to have to come to some consensus as to how we as a committee would respond to a question if asked. So maybe the thought should be in how we would address the question in terms of a response, as opposed to what we can cut now as a potential answer to that question. Just a thought.
Tom?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's John. And Josh, I think it's a great discussion that you brought up, and I'm happy to see you've identified these particular matters. But I've been impressed with, and I have trust in the management, the financial management that I've seen from Dave and Kate, and they're clearly cognizant of the pressures and challenges that COVID-19 has put both on the budget we're in now and the budget we're about to approve. And I think that mindset will not go away when this new budget is approved, and as a fact will continue. And we'll be looking at items that if we don't need to hire them, similar to what the schools did back in January, and so we sort of put a frost or a freeze or whatever term you want to use because of the storm clouds that they were seeing. I expect the same thing would be exercised here. And so I don't want to go back and sort of micromanage in this manner, particularly because I think it's a dangerous sort of precedent to, we're doing this on a Zoom meeting without having, all the participants who I think, should be a part of a discussion like this and be able to weigh in on their own perspectives with the various departments. And it's a little bit of it's certainly not intentional, but I could see how it might be perceived as sort of a blindside. And I'm not sure that's the way we operate. I know it's not the way we operate, and so I'm hesitant and reluctant and will not go forward with what you've laid out here.
Yeah, just to be clear, I haven't made a motion to amend the budget. This is just a template for if there were such a motion.
So Josh, I do appreciate you putting this together, and would ask for you to actually send me a copy as I prepare my presentation, which is going to be an unusual presentation with regard to the operating budget compared to previous years. I'll be looking for all your input to it as well. And I just echo what others have said. And what I've said, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I think a number of these things are very small and maybe not, I don't want to say worth the effort, but at this point, second guessing ourselves is what we're doing because we thought they were worthwhile back in March.
Hey, Tom, just in terms of, sorry, it's Barry, just
Go
in
ahead.
terms of answering or anticipating, I guess, questions. Your comment before is probably the most significant one, which is we have made adjustments to the budget in response to this. The $4.9 million is a significant reduction in the budget. And we still have ample reserves, don't forget, for if absolutely necessary. Not that that's what they're necessarily intended for, but I think, at this stage, there is so much unknown, and we will have, adjustments that can be made in October as well, based hopefully with some more information if need be. I think, anyway, I don't want to keep piling on. I just think,
Yeah.
So right
So
now,
just
that's
to close it out, just one point of business. There actually is a motion on the floor that Josh put forward earlier with regard to the technology. There wasn't a second, and I didn't know if anybody wanted a second. Following my Robert's Rules of Order, I have a motion out there, and I don't want it hanging there. So, is there a second for Josh's motion with regard?
I'll second the motion.
So that's the motion on the. Just to be clear, I've lost my page. To reduce the school technology budget to 113,000. Is that correct, Josh?
So given the prior discussion and given the fact that these funds may not be certified in time for an October town meeting, I'm happy to withdraw my motion.
Okay. So I guess because John's second is Haynes out there. So, okay. Motion withdrawn.
So obviously I'll withdraw my second if that's where the motion's going.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the lively discussion. It's helpful for me and hopefully for all of us as I put together the presentation. We all set with this. This is actually all part of the discussion on Article 21. Any further discussion on any items with the cash capital warrant article? Okay. The next item is.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a vote on this, have we? I'd like to vote that the committee recommend adoption of Article 21 as amended.
I apologize. Thank you, Dick.
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? And I will take a roll call vote. Garrett, yay or nay? Josh?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you for helping me out there, Dick. I appreciate it. The next item is the reserve fund transfers, but there was going to be one, but it has been withdrawn and there's no reserve fund transfer. Is that correct, Dave?
That's correct.
May special town meeting. As I told you earlier, Article 1 has been withdrawn. And we have Article 2, which is unpaid bills from prior years. I assume, Dave, you'll be speaking to this.
Yes, Mr. Chair. These are bills that were incurred during fiscal 2019, and they were received after the close of the fiscal year. They're for medical services that were provided. They're pre-employment physical expenses that the town incurs before hiring employees.
And what is the dollar amount?
They are itemized, Mr. Chair, but the total amount is $6,286.50, and it's a total of 5 different invoices.
All for pre-employment physicals?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have any questions, discussions for Dave?
I know, Dave, sorry.
Go ahead, Barry.
Dave, I know this is a recurring article every year, but the reason for not receiving these bills in a timely fashion is what, generally?
Medical billing, it's always late.
Well, one, it's not a recurring article. We don't actually like to even have this article, but it does happen from time to time. And it is a matter of, it's difficult for me to explain what is in the mindset of the vendor on not getting the bill, but there were bills that that we did not receive in time to pay them prior to the closeout of the fiscal 19 books.
Go ahead, Josh.
Mr. Chair, so these are for medical bills. Are these eligible for workers' compensation, or do these happen to town employees on the job? I guess I'm just looking for more context.
It is not workers' compensation, and interestingly enough, police and fire personnel are not covered under the workers' compensation law. It's a different fund, which ironically is one of the articles that we withdrew in order to shorten the warrant for June. But they are the tests that we do prior to hiring an individual.
I see. Thank you.
Barry?
I'll make a motion to approve Article 2, appropriate for payment of unpaid bills of prior years of $6,286.50.
I have a second.
Second.
Rick seconds. And I'll call a roll call vote. Quick question. I noticed Carol's not on my screen anymore. Is that? She didn't mention to me she had to leave. Oh, okay.
No.
Dick on the motion.
Yes.
Josh.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
Garrett.
Aye.
And the chair votes yes as well. Did I call you Barry?
No.
Sorry.
Made the motion.
Yes. I vote yes, but I also think the town should have a snooze you lose policy.
I think I'm the one that snoozed there. And so the motion passes. So now we're going to turn to Article 10. And I apologize to the people who are speaking to the later agenda items. We're almost an hour behind, but.
So, Mr. Chair, I will bring in Mary Ann Cooley, select board member. And I'll bring in the town manager, Kate Fitzpatrick. But I believe Mary Ann Cooley is speaking to the article.
She is, as I understand it. Hello, Mary Ann. So you're still muted.
Hello there, how are you?
Fine, how are you? Thank you for waiting. Hope you didn't rush out of your board meeting just to be here, because.
We finished all our work, so then it's been Zoom all day long. I think this is hour number 13.
Good for you. So why don't you bring us up to speed on.
So I'm not a planning board person, but I am speaking to this for the select board. The planning board was not actually able to be here this evening. They had been unaware of it, and when I checked with them today, they couldn't fit in their schedule, so my apologies on their behalf. But this particular article, as Tom said, the select board withdrew special town meeting article number 1, which was a traffic study specifically for highway commercial 1, and we withdrew that actually in favor of this overall planning consulting article. This article is really for the use of funds by the planning board to help some kind of build out traffic system impact analysis of zoning initiatives that they undertake. And the reason this proposal is coming forward now is that if there are efforts that they are undertaking that they would like to conclude by town meeting next spring, those monies will need to be spent earlier than if we waited to the fall town meeting cycle and then tried to build in a public process after that. So when we looked at the overall scope of the articles, it was clear that this was the article that actually needed to be prioritized so it could support their planning work. Some portion of this article may be used for Highway Commercial 1, but the answer is I don't really know what yet. Originally, the Finance Committee had funded a traffic study to be done for Highway Commercial 1 this spring. And then things happened and there wasn't traffic and they didn't spend the money. And then there was a thought that maybe they'd spend it in the fall when there would be traffic, but I don't think we actually think there'd be traffic in the fall either. So we're gonna need to do something different in looking at that. And what has been discussed is that we will get, after town meeting, if this goes forward, then we will convene, the 3 boards or some subset of the 3 boards, the planning, finance, select board, to have a conversation about how that particular item might or might not go forward. Because we think at this point, given the pandemic, that there's a big picture discussion that we need to have there about what is really required for us to understand what's needed. But meanwhile, the planning board has some other things that continue to be on their list of areas that they would like to figure out at some point where they're going to move forward and what they're going to choose to move forward. Those areas that continue to be on the list are Chestnut Street zoning. They keep looking at cycling back to the business district that's along Highland Avenue between May and Rosemary Street needs to be studied. That is actually as I understand it, one of the oldest set of zoning rules we still have in place. They largely date back to the 1950s. Okay, so just trying to figure out what would be done, but these funds can be deployed by the planning board to support different zoning initiatives that they have come forward to them.
Great, thank you. So I will, I was a little haphazard last time. I think I will go through person by person and call on you again. So we'll do it that way. See if you have any questions or concerns. I'll start with Dick.
No questions.
Rick?
No questions.
John?
Question, and that is, does the planning board make the decisions on how to spend this money entirely on its own? Or will they be seeking input from the select board and us as the finance committee?
With all of the funds?
Before decisions are made. Yes.
So they do spend the money certainly under the oversight of the town manager. Okay, but I do not know that they certainly normally haven't come to the select board or to the finance committee, I think, for each and every piece of any planning funds that they might spend. Kate might correct me if I'm misstating that, but I think that's my understanding.
Follow up, John, or okay?
That's fine.
Josh?
I'm curious how many years these funds are expected to last.
Any funds that are not spent in the upcoming year would disappear? No?
This is a financial warrant article, so I think it can continue indefinitely, my understanding is.
Mr.
Kate, I'm
Chair,
going to let you go. Yes?
the answer is yes, until the purpose of the appropriations cease to exist, which in the case of planning studies, there will always be studies available in the future, so it rolls over. I think the last time the Finance Committee in town meeting appropriated funds, it was 3 or 4 years. I can get back to you before you end tonight with that answer.
Thank you.
Dave, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I do have a note earlier here that talks about an FY 2015 appropriation. So it could be that 2015 was the last time there was an appropriation. And then I know last year there was some discussion about this and there were no funds available, which is what resulted in going to the Finance Committee for a reserve fund transfer to be used for that purpose, and also in looking at building in funds again in the budget this year.
So it sounds like this is intended for multiple years, not just for studies completed during the upcoming fiscal year.
So depending on the scope of their work, it sounds like that is possible. If the funds are not spent, they would be used in the future when they are needed.
Thank you.
Garrett?
No questions or comments.
Barry?
I'm good.
Carol?
No questions.
So just to make sure I understand, so every few years there's a warrant article to give them a little pile of money to use for consulting that lasts for however long it lasts. That sounds like what the standard operating procedure has been for a few years.
Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. And it is actually the Finance Committee's recommendation to do it that way.
Okay.
The request was actually to be added to the operating budget.
Any further questions by anybody? Follow-ups? Can somebody offer a motion? Dick, you're muted.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Finance Committee recommend adoption of, is it Article 2, the special town meeting?
It's actually Article 10 of annual.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on Article 10 of the annual, right in front of me. Appropriate the sum of $60,000.
Do I have a second? Don't be so quiet. Somebody can second it.
I'll second it.
Thanks, John. Any further discussion? Raise your hand if you got something to add. All right. I will go through the roll call vote now. John?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Garrett?
Aye.
Dick?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
And the chair is in favor. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all.
But not least for the articles. Thank you, Marianne.
I'll say good night. Good discussing in the future.
We were doing follow-up for Article 22 on the Children's Hospital Pediatric Medical Facility. We had some questions that were asked and I believe answered. And I will put it out to Finance Committee members if anybody has any follow-up questions for Kate on the memo. I'll roll through. I'll start with John.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate the memo. I still have some of my own sort of questions and investigation that I haven't had time to complete. And I'll tell you what my concern is. My concern is that the valuation that's being used for the project upon which the pilot payment is being made is a little bit over $40 million. And the construction cost of the project is $130 million. And I'm just, I understand that a negotiation took place, and I understand that, Children's is saying they're being very generous, but I'm also trying to understand sort of what, if anything, we may have left on the table in this negotiation by virtue of what other properties in that area are valued at and what they're paying taxes on. And I haven't had a chance to complete that yet. And it's just, so for me, it's a timing matter that I'm still working on, just so that I can feel comfortable with that valuation as it exists in the pilot agreement. So I'm in favor of the project, and I understand why we want to have them as a citizen of the town. I'm just, for my own education, before I can vote affirmatively for the motion, I just need to be satisfied as to that valuation and why it is what it is and how it compares to other properties in the area.
Okay. Josh, you have any?
So I'm not saying if it goes forward with a vote, I'm going to abstain if the vote is on it tonight, just because I haven't finished my work on it.
Okay, I understand. Go ahead, Dick.
I want to sort of a follow-up to John's question. I want to see if my understanding is correct. The basic real estate tax provision in the pilot is based on what is assumed a commercial building in that location would call for. Am I correct with that?
It's that a building that's valued with a value of 44 million.
Yeah, and is that representative of what a building would be? Or is that the question?
That's what I'm not sure of,
Yeah.
and that's what I need to be comfortable that it is.
Okay, and the other half of it is the personal property is taxes projected, at least in the first instance, to be what a normal commercial enterprise would generate, but then it is going to be earmarked for youth-related activities rather than general town purposes. Is that correct?
Yes. Mr. Chair, if I may,
Please go ahead.
the town assessor conducted his analysis and determined the valuation. It was not a negotiated valuation. It was a determination by the town assessor of what the income value approach would bring. So I don't know if Dave is more familiar with the assessing practices than I am, but he may be able to fill you in on that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the valuation, commercial properties are not valued based upon the cost of them, but they're actually valued on an income approach. And the reason for that, and it's an accepted practice in assessment valuation for commercial properties, unlike residential property, you don't have the turnover necessarily to say what the marketplace is dictating the value of a commercial property is. So there's the income approach, that is the rent generation of the property. And that was the approach that the assessors looked at, is what an office building of the size and complexity proposed by Children's would generate for a tax bill for commercial purposes. And I think upon your further examination, you'll see that it is consistent with other commercial office space in Needham Crossing.
Dick, do you have anything else? Dick, do you have anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Rick, you have any questions? Barry?
I apologize because I didn't read the pilot that thoroughly, but was there a big part of this is the presumed economic impact of this use versus, or I guess just of this use, but was there any comparison to your knowledge, Dave or Kate, what the economic impact of a standard commercial office building would be? And would that be similar or materially different to the best of your knowledge?
So I guess I would say that the economic impact that's projected to be generated from a development is typically what the developer likes to show to make the developer's point.
Right, okay. Mm-hmm.
We don't have any empirical data that, for instance, NBC Universal's assertion that the number of coffee shops and dry cleaners it would generate. I mean, it makes some sense logically, but we don't have that. I will say, and I think Dave would have better figures though, that the uses that we put in the park that have claimed that they would be using hotels. You could extrapolate that that's true, given that we had such great hotel excise, for the last couple of years. Obviously, it's dried up, but we would probably have to do our own analysis. But I would say that for us negotiating this pilot, the piece about the external was not really a consideration.
Okay.
You all set, Barry?
Yep, that's fine. I was just curious more than anything
Gotcha.
else.
Carol, you have any questions, comments?
I do not.
Garrett?
I don't have any questions.
Josh?
No, my questions were already answered. Thank you.
Okay. I am all set as well. Do not have any questions. So the article is on the floor if anybody is interested in making a motion, or we can delay and do it at a later time, which I don't know would be yet, maybe before town meeting, but.
I would be happy, Tom, I'd be happy to make a motion to approve Article 22. Citizens petition for change the zoning for a pediatric medical facility in the New England Business Center.
And do I have a second?
Second.
So this
Mr.
is
Chair.
Garrett, I have a question. Note I made was 130 million versus $40 million. Can somebody articulate what that means?
Yeah, I'll just tell you why I raised it, not so much that it means something, but to me, the concern is that the construction of this facility or facilities is estimated to cost 130 million.
Right.
But for purposes of the valuation of the project, that's then tracked back to what the taxes would be so that this pilot would be in lieu of those taxes, is at 44 million. And it's that discrepancy that I for one don't feel comfortable enough as I sit here in this chair to be able to say that I can vote affirmatively for it. I just need to do some more work on it.
Mr. Chair?
Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in light of the fact that John wants to continue his research, can we delay this? I mean, do we have an opportunity to delay this, and when would we vote on this if we were to delay the vote?
Well, that's a reasonable question. Logistically, we don't have another meeting scheduled.
And I'm not asking for a delay. I'm just letting you know where I stand on it.
So to back to Garrett's question. So if I understand what Dave said, was that the cost of the project is, I'm going to use the word irrelevant, that might be too strong, to what the assessed value would be, and that for commercial properties they're using an income approach. Is that correct, Dave? And that income approach is, by our assessor, apparently is around $44 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. And all other commercial property is done in the same manner. And as I stated, if you choose to wait until next Wednesday, although you don't have a meeting scheduled yet, but would be in time for town meeting, I think you will find that to be true in terms of what other property is coming in at for an assessed value.
And can I have my property taxes assessed based on income approach?
Right, and that's why that's one of the real issues here. I mean, Children's would not build it for 130 and then sell it for $44 million. And so that's why I raise it.
Well, I guess the question, and this is an education for me as well, is that if the income approach is the way that we do with all of commercial properties, and it seems to be irrelevant how much they spend to build the building, even though for my home it makes a difference, I guess it doesn't for the commercial properties. That's what I'm hearing.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, yes, the cost of your home, but then it's still the market price that you can sell it that determines value. And again, because commercial property does not turn over, and comparable sales in commercial property is much more problematic to do. That is why the income approach, the income generation of property, is the methodology widely accepted in determining value.
So it's not unique to Needham. Other towns and cities do that as well.
It is not unique to Needham.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's not unique. What I'm saying that to value a hospital where someone's going to actually be using what they're building for their business, as opposed to the rental income of it, which is not why Children's is building it, should be considered. And that's what I'm struggling with. And with this article, when there's no real proponent, when there's no one who on the town side has said why all these things are good, whether it's the planning board or someone else, that's why I'm raising these questions, because obviously Children's is going to say what they said, and I would if I was in their position. I'm just trying to protect us, and I think there's information, at least I personally need to know in order to feel that we're adequately protected.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, I mean, I agree with that statement, but again, the number was derived from the town, and I think the town is, maybe it hasn't been clear, very much a strong proponent of this project and very supportive of seeing it move forward.
Then again, if you wouldn't, did you say the town is very supportive?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, just as a sort of a counter, not a counter, but a different spin on what John was saying. While it's true what you say, that the logic of building, spending all with the building versus they wouldn't do it for the rental income, this also is an entity that by law is not required to pay a tax. So this has got to be a negotiated number. And so the question seems to me come down to, is this a reasonable negotiation? And for the town to end up with the equivalent of what a residential commercial building would generate in that site strikes me as being reasonable.
It very well could. As I said before, I haven't gotten to looking at the other properties and what they're valued at and what they're bringing in on taxes. And so, again, I'm not asking the vote to be held up. I'm just explaining where what my thinking is.
So I have a motion and a second, and there are other. I'm looking forward to go. I would like to go forward with a vote this evening. Is there?
Can you restate the motion? I'm sorry, Tom.
The motion just to adopt the article as included in the warrant article, which is to approve the zoning changes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Josh, do you have your hand raised? Yep.
Yeah, I think there was just maybe a typo in the agenda. I think this is Article 19 rather than Article 22.
Yeah, we've had a problem with that one. I don't know why it is 19. It was originally 22.
Right.
So it's not made up.
So if there hasn't been a second, I second the motion.
There was.
Oh, there was.
Yeah, there's a second already.
Any further discussion? So we'll take a call. Dick?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Garrett?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
John?
I abstain.
And the chair's in favor. It's 7-0 with one abstention.
Motion passes.
Brings us finally to our last item, although I do have something to say in the updates. Town meeting logistics. I don't know if there's anything new. Louise, is there something in particular I need to be sharing? I know you sent out the procedure for recording your Zoom presentation. It seemed fairly straightforward to me. Hopefully it was to you as well.
I had one question. Can I record? I have two articles. Can I record them both in the same session, or do I have to do two separate sessions for the two separate articles?
I think they're going to post them in different places, like in an order. I would suggest you do them separately.
Oh, okay.
So, Louise,
Yep.
how do I find what article I'm doing?
On the status of article sheet that I sent out, it has it, but I'll get in touch with you and let you
Thank you.
know.
Is there any other logistical issues that are new, Kate, that you guys may have seen the layout? We're at the front as we are normally, to the left or to the right of the moderator as you face him. It's in the school parking lot, so we'll be sort of near the building, I assume.
It's in the Memorial Park parking lot
Yeah, did I say something else? I meant
at
Memorial.
the school, just to be clear.
Okay, sorry. Memorial parking lot.
We're still refining the plan, Mr. Chair, but, and we're also trying to find a way to have tables for finance committee members for your materials, so we're working on that. We are going to be able to provide 9-foot separation from each individual, and we'll be proposing separate entrances by precinct, and then we'll figure out for the folks on boards and committees who aren't in a precinct which way they should go in. We'll be working with the moderator on a logistics sheet that will be sent to town meeting members very soon. But I'm happy to answer any questions that people have.
The process is similar to what it usually is. There won't be any fanfare at the beginning, but the moderator will do a consent agenda, consent calendar, and anything that has questions, they'll go through that. Obviously, the presentations will have already been given, so he will ask for questions from the floor. So any questions from the floor. One of the questions I had, so questions on the floor will be posed, then the proponents, the board and will get up and speak, answer as necessary. Is that correct?
Yes, and there will also be an opportunity for town meeting members and the public to send questions in advance to townmeeting@needhamma.gov. And if there are questions for the finance committee, we'll just route them to you and hope to get the answers posted up on the website.
Okay, so those would be sent to us and we do written answers and send them back. Is that what?
If you can, yeah. And
Okay,
then
so
there will be microphones at the front for questions for the finance committee to be answered from that front of the parking lot.
okay, and I assume there'll be no paper distributions of any sort.
I've said incredibly limited, so I'm
Okay.
probably have a couple warrants.
Okay, so if there's something that we want them to have in hand, we should get them to your staff by Friday?
So the goal is to mail it by Friday. It could be Monday, but you know,
Okay.
if we have to send one more mailing, that would be fine too.
Okay. I think somebody else had a hand raised. Josh, go ahead.
Is there going to be seating available for residents who are not town meeting members?
Limited, but yes.
As I understand it, will actually be fenced in. Is that correct? So we'll be open, but you can't escape so easily.
So,
Carol?
Mr. Chair, Kate, if we need to respond to a question, do we go up to a podium like we usually do, or how is that going to work?
So I'm still working out the logistics with the moderator. We have these special mics that are kind of, they almost like hang down so that people don't touch anything.
Okay.
I would expect there would be one at the front. I don't know if there's just one for the finance committee, or maybe the select board and the finance committee would share it as proponents. I'll get you that as soon as I can.
Great, thank you.
Dick?
It's probably in there. We supposed to wear masks?
Yes, face
Yeah.
coverings.
So, yeah.
When we record or just when we're at the meeting?
Not like
Depends where you're recording, Barry.
Is attire casual or formal?
You know, that hasn't come up. It's going to be June on a parking lot.
Shorts and sandals?
Off the top.
I won't be wearing a suit.
I was actually going to advocate that every finance committee member wear a bow tie.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on logistics? Okay, I have just one real brief thing now on the committee updates. I received an email from a citizen who was actually disappointed that we didn't have citizen requests, but sent me an email. And I was going to go at length on it, but we actually already did go at length on it, which was discussion of the operating budget and wanting us to make sure that we were being cutting as much as possible and being as prudent as possible. It was so our discussion earlier was very relevant to this person's concern. And I don't think this person is alone. I think we're all as concerned, and hopefully we'll be able to answer the questions to town meeting satisfaction. And that's all I have. Anybody else have any updates? Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I would just recommend that in the future we include an invitation for residents to speak at our meetings. I know it's been included in all prior meetings that I've been a part of. And I think even on the Zoom format, it's conducive to that. I know last week in our Zoom meeting, we had that on the agenda and it worked fine. So I think that it's a good service for the public and it's good for us to hear from the public.
Thank you. Barry.
Just a quick question for Dave. It's almost June 1st. I'm just curious if there been any anomalies, I guess, with tax collections.
Yes, and that is that tax collections, because the due date was shifted from May 1st to June 1st, the escrow companies in particular are taking advantage of that. And although your mortgage statement may show that your escrow was debited for property tax payments, they are remitting the money as close to June 1st as possible.
They're floating away.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But as previously, I expect collections to be comparable to prior years by June 30th.
Well, that's good. I mean, obviously it's still early in the game, but it's a good data point.
If only landlords could be that lucky.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your, again, a lot of time, lengthy meeting, but we got a lot accomplished and I appreciate it. We will next see each other actually in person at town meeting, although we won't see your whole face. And I believe there's a mailing coming out that will have more details as they figure out the logistics. And at this point, we don't arrive early. We'll arrive at the normal time.
5 o'clock, right?
5 o'clock. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Do we need
Do we have to do a roll call finish?
Kind of a motion to adjourn.
Roll call.
I move.
Second that.
And all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Unanimous. Good night, everyone.
Right.
Good night.
Aye.